Well, the one
sounds like a good deal.
I've ordered from Juliet, so I've got to be able to.
Oh, good. I'm glad she told you to.
Yes.
I'm glad to hear it. Are you all right?
Yes, yeah.
Good.
And we did get another probably coming in. All that's up, but if Yes.
Sorry, I'm struggling to get into presentation. No, I'm in Teams, but I can't open the presentation. So, and it opened earlier. So just give me 1 second, and hopefully I'll be able to.
All the same.
Different ones.
There's always something
Loughborough University. I'm not quite sure why it signed me up as that.
It's on a stick.
Pardon?
It's on a stick.
No.
Oh, sometimes it's on to get through there.
On the web. I have had it open and for some reason it's just freezing now every time it tries to open PowerPoint.
Not being sure yet. Finally, on a
That's strange, isn't it?
Yeah, it was.
It's there ready to go. Yeah, I got this thing.
Still loading presentation.
Yeah. So where do you see when there's anybody else there?
There are a couple of people signed in. Two, but I don't know if they can. A few people that have been invited. Yeah, there's a few people there.
Do you have to let them in?
I don't. It looks like it says Josephine Taylor started recording to the clouds, so it looks like Joe's there. But that seems to have disappeared. Oh, here we go. Share screen, share window. There we go. Oh. It's now loaded however many times, is it?
That's it. That's it. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, except I can't see my notes.
Right. You're nearly there.
Yeah, it's because I don't want to be able to see my notes.
Right, I've just lost it again.
Oh. Sorry, everybody.
You've got, that's it.
Okay.
Anything. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to first meeting of the autumn here at VTC. Nice to see quite a few of you here tonight. And after we've got round that, we're all right, still working. We've got a few people online at home. And if you can hear me at home, good evening. And if you can see the picture, that's even better. Sometimes get either one or the other or nothing. But anyway, tonight we're fine. We've got tonight a talk, really. This was Sarah Bedford, who's our reserves officer based here, but in the are we in the east here?
We are in the east, yeah. Wild east. Yeah.
The wild east of the county. And Sarah looks after the grassland reserves, amongst other things, of course. But that's what she's going to talk to you about, is managing these grassland reserves. They're very important because the further east we go, anyway, I'm not going to tell you too much. I'll let Sarah explain everything. So thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Yeah, do you mind turning off the lights, Linda? I think the photos will work better. Just hold it in, yeah. Welcome, everybody. Apologies for the delayed start due to technology. It was all working beautifully at about 4:30 this afternoon, which meant I should have known that it wouldn't work on the night. Yeah, as Anthony said, my name's Sarah. I think I've met quite a lot of you before. If I haven't, then do feel free to come and say hi after the talk if you've got any specific questions for me. But I look after the Eastern Reserves for Leicestershire Rutland Wildlife Trust, and I've been in this role almost exactly 2 years. We're going to talk today about managing grassland and what that is, and how we manage grassland here at the Trust, and really what a quintessential English meadow might be. So, you know, you've got bursts of colour, you've got sunny, you know, we're a long way from that today in mid-October in the dark, sitting in the VTC, but these are the kinds of views that you might get in east of Leicestershire and Rutland from May time all the way through to the end of August, beginning of September. And just talking about what a meadow is and how we manage them is what I'm going to cover this evening, and talk a little bit specifically about some of the reserves that I manage. 90% of wildflower meadows have been lost since the 1930s. That's a pretty staggering statistic. And we now only have 1% of UK landmass that is meadow or grassland, classed as meadow or grassland habitat. We at the Trust manage our ancient and new meadows as nature reserves, and some of you might already know of some of those nature reserves in our area that are really fine examples within the two counties of their specific type of grassland habitat, which I'll talk about in a little bit. I love a map. So this is a map of our land holdings as a trust. There's a couple of places not on that. This is a couple of years old, but basically I look after the bit, well, all of Rutland, and to the top of the map, I've got a little pointer, which I'll probably only use once. Oh, there we go. So this right-hand side, so draw a line past Holwell, Coombs, Stonesby, Wymondham, Cribbs, and then round this corner. I don't look after Tilton, but I do look after Laund, down to Great Marylebone and Liddington Meadow, in this tiny little pocket here. But you'll see that there's a number of site names that feature the name Meadows. So on the west, they've got 8 sites that all have the word meadow in them. We've got fewer. I look after 9 grassland reserves, and I think only 3 or 4 of them are called meadows. But actually, the quarries are probably the more important things to think about on our side when you're thinking about grassland. So Stonesby Quarry, Bloody Oaks Quarry, Kesson Quarry, and there's quarries up at Holwell as well. And they are really important limestone grasslands for the trust that we take care of on the east. So don't let the names deceive you. Meadow isn't always the kind of meadow that you think it is, and quarry isn't always a quarry that isn't a meadow, if that made some sense. I will mention Liddington Meadow briefly because I think it's this mysterious site that everybody always wonders about. If you haven't been, don't bother. It's only 1.3 hectares, small but beautifully formed, semi-improved grasslands down just outside Liddington village, regularly floods, and it does have some really nice dragonflies because there's a stream that runs alongside. And I was there in the summer doing a site check to make sure it hadn't disappeared. And yeah, we had butterflies and some wildflowers on site. And it does have a hay cut every year. It is managed by the trust, but it's definitely one of our quiet sites. And you wouldn't know it was there if you stopped in the lay-by. There's a disc on the gate that says it's a LRWT site, but other than that, a very small meadow indeed. So I've mentioned these ones that we take care of on the east. And I'll talk a little bit about some of them, and some of them I won't talk about because there isn't time. I could talk for hours about each of these sites individually, probably. But I'm just going to draw out some of the features of grassland management, why we do what we do, how we do what we do, and then give you some highlights from some of the sort of top couple of reserves from this list. Classification of those grasslands will depend on the ground that they are on. And you can see some fairly weird and wonderful words up there. Basically, we're looking after calcareous grassland, which is limestone grassland, mesotrophic grassland, which is considered to be neutral grassland, and then there's a couple of semi-improved sites in there as well, Liddington, which I've mentioned, and Coombs Meadow, which I won't really be talking about, but I can answer any questions on at the end of the presentation. Does anyone know how high maintenance a meadow is? High or low, do you think, in terms of our suite of reserves within the Wildlife Trust? Really high. Proper divas of the nature reserve is a grassland. Like, they need a lot of sweet talking and a lot of love. And we do a huge amount of work on our grasslands throughout the year to make sure that they're in the best possible state they can be. I haven't got my notes open on here, so you'll have to forgive me if I go back and forth a little bit. But one of the things that we have to think about when we manage our grasslands is that a lot of our sites have designations on from Natural England. So they're what are called triple SIs, so it's sites of special scientific interest. And those designations bring with them a whole host of criteria that we need to meet as nature reserve officers in order to keep Natural England happy, to get the money that we get off them for stewardship, but also to keep that grassland in its best possible health as a habitat. So I've just done a sort of a quick snip of one of the lists for, I think this is for Merry's Meadow, but you can see how prescriptive Natural England are when they ask us to manage a grassland in a specific way. So the first one is that we don't cut it before the 15th of July. And that we can't work on any water features between March and August. Soil phosphate indexes, bracken stands if there are any, management of ponds, They should all have at least 2 high value indicators for priority habitat feature G06, which probably means not a lot to you guys, but I'll talk about positive and negative indicator species a bit later. You can't supplementary feed on a grassland. So that means that if you've got animals on that grassland to graze it, you can't then bring them a bale of hay from somewhere else in case you introduce other species and also increase the number of nutrients on that site. You have to manage with livestock if you're managing with livestock between the 1st of April and the 30th of November, not before and not after. Any drainage works have to be in writing to Natural England before undertaking. In fact, any work on a triple SI site, if it's not within the management plan and it's something that you want to do outside of the prescription, has to be submitted as consent to Natural England and they have to approve it. And then stock numbers have to be submitted and made available on request. So it's quite a long list of prescriptions. There's lots more. That's just the sort of main features that we have to consider when we go in and say, right, I want to keep this meadow as a beautiful meadow. How do I do it? Oh, I know what I'll do. I'll stick a load of sheep on it, but I need to make sure those sheep are on between April and November. So what does a year in a grassland look like? So this is taken from Meadows for Life. So the idea behind this is that you're managing your own grasslands, your own wildflower meadows at home. And I just thought this was quite a nice pictorial description of how we look after grasslands. So generally between April and July, August time, you don't do anything, you leave it uncut, you enjoy it, and you see what's coming up that year. And is it the same this year as it was last year, for example? Are you seeing particular species that are thriving because of the climate conditions or because of the grazing regime that you've got going on? Between August and September, and sometimes into October, depending on how your work plan's going for the year, you'll be thinking about mowing and collecting those arisings, raking them off and moving them away from the grassland in order to make sure that the wildflower array gets the best possible chance of reseeding and growing for the year to come. Then during the winter, you'll pretty much be, well, it says here you'll leave it, but I'll come back to that in a second. And then you might have a second cut the following spring, February, March time, to encourage more growth, particularly if you've got vigorous growth on your site. So Meadows, Plant Life, the Magnificent Meadows project, say leave your meadow uncut unless growth is vigorous between October and January, February. Here at the Trust, we do a really other important feature on our grasslands between those months, and that's scrub removal. So basically every habitat wants to scrub up and get back to woodland. And it's our job, as this is where I say about grasslands being high maintenance, divas, to try and manicure and groom that grassland to make sure it's in the best possible state. We have to start removing things like blackthorn, hawthorn, guelder rose, bramble, all the things that want to come in and cover up that really important grassland feature in the habitat that we're trying to preserve. So the winter months for us are almost as busy, if not equally busy, as the summer months for cutting and raking. So I think that's an important thing to think about. The grassland site that you visit in the winter that looks relatively unimpressive and you think that maybe no work's going on it, I can tell you that we'll be going out 3 times a week in work party teams to get rid of any young scrub that you can see popping up all over the place, and it does like to pop up all over the place, particularly blackthorn. So we spend lots and lots of time removing scrub. I can't remember what this slide was about, so you're going to have to bear with me a second. Does anyone recognise the site? Yep, it's Mary's. Mary's Meadows, yeah. Yeah, so Mary's is a very good example of a superstar site. This is a photo that was taken the year before last at the green-winged orchid count, and that's normally in the middle of May. And that year before last was, or 2023, when this photo was taken. It was a beautiful day. We had 13 or 14 volunteers on site, I think, counting every single orchid spike on the reserve as an indicator of the habitat's health. And we've had records on Merries since the 1970s. This year it wasn't so pleasant, so I haven't included a photo. It was all grey skies and wind, but we still did the count, and that's one of the annual surveys that we do at Merries Meadow and at Cribbs Meadow that's been running for nearly 4 decades, I believe. It's one of the ways that we know how things are going. I've also put a couple. I'm just going to share my notes with you because I can't see another way of me remembering what I was trying to say. So common standards monitoring, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We've got anecdotal surveys through botanists who visit the site. So Merries Meadows are the same example, really good example of lots and lots of people who come for the floristic diversity of that site, and they want to know what's there, and they do a really good job of telling me what's there because I can't be on every site all of the time. So we will get tip-offs from people who say, I've seen such and such an orchid at Merries, and we'll then go hunting for it. And then butterfly surveys as well will give us a really good idea of how the site's doing and what kind of butterflies are there, and therefore what kind of wildflowers might be there as well. We do have threats and issues to grassland. I've mentioned scrub already. The top left picture is Cribbs Meadow, and meadow sweet there, which is usually seen as a positive indicator of grassland species, is rife. And to the point where, you know, when we've done surveys recently, we've been talking about how we might manage it so it doesn't actually crowd out lots of other species. So that's what was once or on other sites is seen as a positive species. On Cribbs, it's actually becoming a bit of a threat to the other wildflower species. So managing those is something going forwards that we'll need to consider. And the plant on the right, does anyone know? It says it underneath. It's Japanese knotweed, yeah. So this is at Ketton Quarry. It's a patch of knotweed that's been there for well over a decade, I believe. And we've recently been told that we're going to get some funding from it's a DEFRA-based fund that was put in place to help tackle Himalayan balsam. But they've got a bit of money left over and they're going to help us try and tackle the knotweed at Ketton Quarry. So fingers crossed that won't be the threat that it has been, but it will take a number of years of treatment before we'll see the back of it. So that's an ongoing management that we need to consider moving forwards and needs to be written in. You know, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, somebody else needs to know that that's actually going to be managed for the next 5 to 10 years and how it's going to be managed. So writing up our management plans and making sure that other people are aware of how we manage grasslands is a really important feature of managing a site. I mentioned scrub invasion, and I've put it down that it's a time-sucking activity. So physically digging out the invasive scrub takes time. You can see Charles there on the left, one of our practical volunteers, with an incredibly long route. I don't know, do you know where that was from, Dave? Is it a hawthorn? Yeah, but is it a hawthorn root that he's got in his hand? Do you know? No, but it's you know, that's a couple of meters long, and that's all been dug out with a mattock and a tree popper. And you see Dave and Richard there on the right doing similar work with loppers and tree poppers. We've been using tree poppers for a couple of years instead of herbicide because they seem to have better effect on the scrub. No one likes using herbicide anyway, but actually if you're using herbicide and the scrub's still coming back, then why use herbicide? The tree popper is like a lever hand tool. It's this just here with the big long yellow handle, and it clamps around young saplings or young bushes, and you rock it backwards and forwards. I'm making it sound really, really easy. Dave will tell you afterwards that it's not as easy as I'm making it sound. And eventually you're trying to tease out as much of that root as possible. So we congratulate our volunteers when they fetch out as much as they do on that left-hand picture, because it hopefully means that that particular plant isn't going to come back particularly quickly. But it's a long job. We do have some helpers in the job. So We do aftermath grazing and also light grazing of limestone sites in particular. So the sheep that we've got at Ketton are really, really good because they get into places that we can't, and machinery can't, and they nibble and graze in a way that we wouldn't be able to do with a brush cutter or any bigger tools. So I've put that they're pros are scrub removal. That picture on the left, I jumped for joy when I saw that sheep eating the leaves of a hawthorn shrub, because that's exactly what we want them to be doing. We want them to be knocking back those invasive species. And they seem to really enjoy the hawthorn leaves at Ketton. So long may they continue doing that. They also have a light touch. They don't poach the ground in the way that heavier livestock might. And that's really good on these delicate sites where you don't want the ground to become compacted. The sheep at Ketton are a flock of 29. So there's 6 Herdwicks and 23 Hebrideans at the moment. They're very hardy creatures, and they're out year round, and generally look after themselves incredibly well. They get a bit bolshy when you come over with food in the winter time because they do get hungry. As I said, we can't supplementary feed them at Ketton. So when it gets cold, and before they're finished grazing, if they do get to a point where there isn't much left for them to graze, we can't just take a bale of hay to them because we'd be introducing nutrients and potentially species that don't belong there. So they have a lick throughout the winter, and usually in November time we move them off to Ketton Priory Field, which is another site within Ketton that they can graze more freely, and we can take bales of hay and so on to them there. So that's how we have to manage the flock, which again, that's time. It's time rich in terms of how much time and effort we put into our flock of sheep, but they do an amazing job. And Ketton is another protected site that's really up there with good limestone grassland in the area. So it's important that the sheep keep doing their job and we enable them to do that as our lawn mowers. Yeah, so I've put down the cons of owning livestock is that, you need someone who knows a bit of animal husbandry. You need to take care of your flock. You need to be on call if one of them escapes and is found walking down Ketton High Street, or there's a dog attack, or there's a member of the public who wants to know about them. My number's plastered all over the reserve for people to ring if something happens to those sheep. So that's, sort of another time drain, and they can be picky. They don't always eat the things that you want them to eat. So yeah, making sure that we have them really intensively grazing areas that we want them to graze isn't always as straightforward as you might like. So I mentioned CSM, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about it because it's a process that we've really only just begun on our reserves this summer just gone. So CSM stands for Common Standard Monitoring, and a method used to assess the condition of grassland habitats and species in SSSIs, and it uses indicator species to determine if the habitat and the species are in favourable, unfavourable, improving, or unfavourable declining condition. So basically a good way, it's a really good quick site check, but it does take a little bit of knowledge of the botanicals on site, and the form and recording system. So we worked with Phil Carter from Notts Wildlife Trust and Claire Sambridge, who used to work for our trust, now works at Natural England, to start building a picture of our key sites in the summer of this year. And then in 2025, I'm hoping that we'll do Ketton and Holwell because they weren't done this year. It struck me when I took on these sites that I didn't really know an awful lot about them, and there was no formal record of what we have in a quick survey technique. And when we had some common standards monitoring training here at Rutland Water, as soon as we did the course, I was like, this is exactly what we need on those major grassland reserves so that we can know how good the habitat is, whether or not it's still got what we thought it had 20 years ago. And because we're not time rich as reserve officers and that we don't always have the volunteers with the knowledge, we needed a way to do a quick test of what was on those reserves, and CSM seemed to fit the bill. So that's what we went for. The first thing you need to do a CSM is to know what habitat category you're looking at. And there's a national vegetation classification, which some of you might have heard of. And Phil Carter, who was really, really helpful, in helping us set up this process, went off and found out what I gave him the vegetation classifications for these sites that we wanted to do. He then looked them up and put together the checklist for those particular habitats. And so I had to go and look at my Latin, which is why they're in the bottom there. So these classifications are basically tell us what that type of habitat you would expect to see, what type of soil it might be on, what kind of grassland it is, and then that will help us say, right, what's the perfect MG5 going to have on it? And that's what your list of positive indicator species will have. And also, what's the perfect MG5 not going to have on it, which is also really important because we monitor the negative indicator species as well. And what that transfers to is a very mind-boggling form with lots of tiny boxes on, with the negative and positive indicators. And on each of the sites, we took a morning or a day, depending on how big the sites were, and we monitored each meadow. So just to go back, and this is how we monitored. This picture here is 4 of us, so the 5th person taking the picture in a 2-metre square. You literally take a corner of the square, someone standing with a clipboard with that list of positive and negative indicator species. They're calling out the list over and over again, and you're saying whether you can or can't see the things that they're calling out. So it's quite intense. You spend a lot of time looking at the ground. And once you've got your eye in and you know what those species look like, it becomes easier. But this picture was taken at Wymond and Rough, and you're going through lots of layers of vegetation depending on the time of year, looking at lots of different shades and shapes of green, to work out whether or not you've got the positive or negative indicator species that you're looking for. So you're looking at a lazy W, which is a common way to do a survey. So across the site, you draw a lazy W. I think we did, can't see on there, 10 points across that lazy W. And this is in the second field at Merry's. So I think we did, might be Longfield that we did there. And the first section of the form is concentrating on the sward. So how much bare ground is there? How long is the sward? How much litter, as in leaf litter that might have dropped from surrounding trees and shrubs is there? Not litter as in, crisp packets and drinks cans. How many herbs compared to how many grasses? We want it to be heavier on the herbal side than on the grasses side for it to be in a positive condition, and whether or not there's scrub present. And each of those, you'll see at the top of the screen, is marked down as a percentage, or the height is marked down in centimetres. Height's a bit difficult. I've put here the average height, sward height, when you're completing it in the summer, will never be in a favourable condition. What it means there is that if you remember the prescriptions list from Natural England, they want a sward height of 5 to 15 centimetres on some of the sites, but that's post-cutting in October or post-grazing. But we still record the sward height anyway, because it gives us an idea of how high the grasses are. And then you want to be going through your positive indicators list. Now, the good thing about showing you my notes is that you can see at the bottom how many positive indicators there are. This is this list on the left-hand side, so from there down to there. And in each quadrat, all we're recording is presence or no presence. So the 4 of us stood around those corners of the square are saying, so Phil was reading out this list. It became a bit of a mantra, a bit of a song almost. And he would say aguamony, lady's mantle, wood anemone. I mean, wood anemone never came up, you won't be surprised to hear. Common knapweed, eyebright, and we would say yes or no, depending on what we could see. But sometimes you have to go rootling through the sward, because your meadow vetchling, for instance, might be crowded out by something that's actually grown up taller. Or cowslips which have gone over by this point, but you can still see what's left of the cowslip from a couple of months before, so you can record that there was a cowslip there. And each of those gets put into the box as 1 or a 0, depending on whether or not they were there. And I've just noticed common knapweed and meadow vetchling on this particular field. Every single quadrat had those as a positive indicator, which is brilliant. That's exactly what we want. You get very excited when you see, what do we have just a few of? I can't read my writing, but you know, I think we had Tormans Hill like once on the whole survey, so a big shout goes up and everyone gets super excited. But all of them are important. All of them are positive indicator species. Where we recorded things that were on the positive list but not in the quadrats, we made a note of that. So I think, did I put it? Yeah, so at Mary's, for example, Pepper, Saxifrage, Bethany and Tormans Hill were seen in other places when we were walking between quadrats. And you're like, oh, damn it, that's not in the quadrat that I've stopped to survey. And you don't, you know, you just want to shuffle right or left to make sure that you get it in. Instead, we would just put at the bottom that those things were present, which helps us to build up a picture of how that site is doing. All of the 5 reserves that we surveyed this summer were thankfully in a very healthy state, despite a tricky winter last winter that was very, very wet. Most of them came back as very positively in a healthy state. And as I said, we'll have a look at Ketton and Holwell in 2025 and see how they're faring. And what I believe the survey is going to do as someone who's looking after those grasslands is serve as a snapshot, see what works, and what we need to manage for. So negative indicator species, things like thistle, dock, ragwort, how much of that is there and we're recording it? And is there more there this year seemingly than last year? Typically you do a common standards monitoring survey once every 4 years. So, you know, if we do this again in 4 years' time, will we find those positive and negatives in the same state, better, worse? And there will be lots of factors that influence that, but it's up to us to try and interpret those results and inform the management going forwards. It might be that we graze things differently, or that we remove more scrub on a site if we think that there's a lot of scrub encroachment, for example. Ragwort, just to pause to mention ragwort, that we manage ragwort on all of the sites that we cut for hay. It has to be removed. It's known as an injurious weed. If our hay gets taken for cattle food or livestock feed, then we have to remove the ragwort. But as it's an important food plant for so many species, we leave clumps of it where we can. So if we're not cutting an area for hay, then we'll leave the ragwort. It's no, you know, it's no negative indicator in that respect. So it's a bit of a tricky topic, ragwort, because we have to take it out, but we also want to keep it. So I understand that a lot of you will probably have strong feelings on ragwort, which I'm happy to talk about a bit later on if you want to. So just to take you through some highlights of various reserves, I've compiled annual reports recently for all of the sites that I manage. There's 14 sites that I manage, but I took out some of the photos from the grassland reserves. So I think they really give a picture of, you know, it's easier to see in the pictures what we're doing and to just talk about some of the species that we found. So the first one is bloody oaks. Because it's alphabetically, it's also one of my favourites. I did Liddington probably a disservice at the beginning of the talk and said that it's only 1.3 hectares and not a lot to look at. This is also 1.3 hectares, and I would say punches well above its weight for its size. It's a real little gem. I absolutely love it as a site, and we get lots and lots of really interesting species here. So the top left picture and the bottom left picture are people working on the site. So this is mowing and raking and scrub removal, which, as I said, happens on all of our grassland reserves. This picture of Juliet's hand with a beetle. Let me see if I can find its name. Galaruca tanaceti. I probably said that wrong. According to Nature Spot, infrequent in Leicestershire and Rutland, only 8 VC55 records for this species up to March 2015. So that's quite an exciting find. I think it was on a gatepost over the summer. And of course, common lizards amongst other reptiles that are found at Bloody Oak. So one on the right there. I don't know if, can you all see it? Just here. Yeah, there's a good little colony of lizards at Bloody Oaks. Next slide is also Bloody Oaks. So the greater butterfly orchid by the gate in a very unassuming place. Again, it's not in flower here, and I don't know if anyone got a picture of it in flower, anyone in the room that went to see it, or You did? Oh, good. Okay, excellent. Maybe you can let me have it at some point. But yeah, dingy skipper, chalk milkwort, mint moth, and yeah, those beetles there, name I won't try and pronounce, mating on a piece of hawk bit, I think that is. These are all pictures that were taken by Tim Sexton on one visit. You know, this is why I say Bloody Oaks punches above its weight. We went to look at the orchids and we saw all these lovely other things as well. And that's just one snapshot of a day at Bloody Oaks. But at the beginning of the season and at the other end of the season with autumn gentian, in the later summer months, it really is a lovely site to visit. And it makes all the grassland management worthwhile when you can see all of these different species that are thriving as a result of the hard work that all the volunteers have put in. Speaking of hard-working volunteers, this is mostly a slide with our volunteers working. So this is Mary's Meadow. We put in some new hedgerow plants in February of this year just to connect up the hedgerow corridors. Got to be really careful with hedgerow though, that it's maintained on a grassland and it doesn't start to shade out the very thing that site is designated for. So going forwards, we have to make sure that hedgerow remains in a neat state, and just some more green-winged orchids in the bottom left-hand corner there as well. This is Stonesby. So a common blue on common knapweed. My first thought about this picture, it feels anything but common. It's a really beautiful image, this, of wildflower grassland doing really, really well. And then pyramidal orchid on the right there. In 2023, if any of you went to Stonesby, we've noted that it was, absolutely stunning for orchids, particularly in Bescaby Close, an area that we'd cleared of scrub and that continues to be cleared of scrub to try and help these plants to flourish. And Stonesby delivers as well. It's really, really lovely site with lots and lots of diversity. So you've got a dronefly top left on a small scabious, you've got cowslips and bluebells bottom left at the beginning of the spring, and then a bee orchid along with pyramidal orchid and bird's foot trefoil in the right hand photo. And more again from Stonesby, some scrub clearance and some raking and mowing at the bottom. And then, marbled white up here on greater knapweed and cuckoo pint pint. I haven't got a huge number of pictures for Wymondham, but I think these two sum it up. It's a really exemplar site, and I'm very much standing on the shoulders of giants when I talk about all of these sites, because Wymondham's a good example. 4 hectares of the grassland here could be over 3 centuries old. So it's not the work that I'm doing today and tomorrow and next year. It's all the work that's gone before in really careful management of livestock and of mowing and grazing. So, and there's a rotating timetable for that. We don't mow every year necessarily. We don't graze every year necessarily. We talk to our graziers. So we've got a grazier that looks after this site for us. And we see whether or not we speak to Natural England as well. Claire came with us to some of our sites, and I talked to her, what do you think, based on the citation for the SSSI, we should be doing on this site going forwards? Do we continue to mow? Do we graze it harder? Do we change the times that we graze? What would benefit this site and keep it in the healthiest possible state it can be? This is Cribs. Another amazing example that scored really highly on CSM monitoring. And I've put in my notes that it wasn't a great year for green-winged orchids, neither here nor at Merry's, but the Adder's tongue fern at Cribs, maybe a wet winter, who knows, were out of control. They were everywhere. And then when we did the CSM, I was really worried. Cribs was the first CSM that we did, and we went with someone from Natural England, and I'm sitting there thinking, but it scored, I think it basically got, the highest possible score. Everyone's minds were blown because of the phenomenal array of wildflowers there, and that's despite that being that overabundance of meadowsweet in one of the meadows as well. So it's a real high hitter is Cribs. We've got a couple of butterfly species creeping in there as well. Something for you to consider when you want to go and look at a grassland is all the lovely butterflies that you get with them. And I've just put a picture here of an owl box that we installed there. So that's a barn owl box. It's really good habitat for barn owls. I've yet to see any droppings or pellets around that box, but fingers crossed, we'll have some barn owl activity there in the future too. Petton. So an ex-quarry, and we have a mowing and grazing regime there. Mowing in areas where we can mow with machinery and then raking everything off. Scrub removal, sheep grazing in areas where we can't get machinery into, and that they do a really good job, and it delivers. So of the 34 species found in Leicestershire and Rutland, and Dave will shout at me if I've got this wrong, I hope I haven't, 29?
I recorded 30 last year.
See, I knew it. I knew I'd get it. I knew I'd get it wrong. Which one of those did you record last year that I haven't added then? Purple Hair Streak, Purple Emperor, White Admiral, Wall, and Chalk Hill Blue.
I think all those occurred.
Oh, okay. So I'm going on the previous year. No. Okay. The point is, it's the top spot in Leicestershire and Rutland if you want to see butterflies, and it's a really lovely walk. Like, it's not your typical meadow, like square meadow, and you walk around the edges and you say, right, I've done it. You know, you've got undulating topography. You might find in some of the areas where the sheep graze, you're in a little microclimate down in a dip. No one would ever know you were there. And there's all sorts of butterflies and day flying moths and other invertebrates around for you to enjoy. So hard work at Ketton definitely pays off. I couldn't talk about grassland management without showing you a picture of getting the boss out on site with the tree popper in his hand. This was last winter, I think. We did a team day there as well, and I put some of our colleagues to work pulling scrub. But yeah, usually it's volunteers who pull scrub. We're also in talks for a contractor to come onto site to help us get rid of some of the scrub there that's gone too far for tree poppers, and they'll bring sensitive equipment on to help us manage some of the scrub that's got away. The benefit of managing grasslands like this mostly for butterflies is that you get other species that come along with it. So adders being the obvious one at Ketton, a really good adder population, lots of sightings of them again this year. And then I'm just going to take a minute to talk about some of the lesser known ones. So glowworms, excellent glowworm surveys this year. We have previously visited once or twice through the summer to see if there's glowworms, but we had a super concentrated effort, particularly at Ketton this year. I know some of you have done glowworm surveys on other sites in the counties, and it really showed us that the glowworm population there is good, much better than we thought it was, and will be the beginnings of hopefully a project to reintroduce glowworms to other similar grassland areas to try and get their numbers back up. The licorice piercer moth, first record for VC 55 in 2022, discovered by Melanie Penson, who's a butterfly recorder, and was still there last year and this year. Very, very specific micro moth, only on wild licorice, hence the name licorice piercer. I don't think we knew that there was licorice at Ketton before the licorice piercer moth was discovered. But yeah, it's doing well, which is great news. And then this is another Latin name. It's Scutelinea barley, which was found, Eagle-eyed Juliet found it in one of the paddocks on a work party, and then when we started looking, it was everywhere. But it's another rare find. So I think there were only 8 records of that fungus before she found it. So yeah, and it's tiny. It's like little fingernail size. So look out for it if you're over at Ketton. So yeah, just to finish really, hopefully you've got an idea from the pictures how important it is to keep these fragile sites in their best health. So I talked about grasslands being divas, but we think that it is important to invest our time and energy and money into the meadows, making them a home for some of our most threatened species. I hope you've learned something from our delve into grassland management. If anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them, and if not, I'll go away and find out. But thank you very much for listening. Hope you're all still awake.
Turn the light on.
Oh, okay.
That's right. Close your eyes. Any questions from the audience? That's almost a fair.
Sarah, I'll ask one. When you do that monitoring, well, we've only done it year one,
Mm-hmm.
do you go back at roughly the same date?
Yeah, I think now we've started, so we chatted with Phil about when the best time to go would be, and we were going for when we might have the greatest chance of seeing those positive indicator species. So having done it at the end of June, beginning of July, yeah, that's probably the date that we'll choose going forwards. But it will depend on climate. So if we've had a particularly wet May and nothing seems to be coming up, but we need to get it done before mowing. So that's the other thing to remember. So after cowslips, because if cowslips and green-winged dorkins are the only thing you're going to see, then it's not going to come out very well. But before everything gets cut.
So it's 10 to 2 by 2 white rabbits.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in each meadow.
Yeah. And meadows are different size, so how do you?
Yeah, well, sometimes we might only do 8. And sometimes we might do 14. It's all about percentages of the size of the site. So that's a judgment call on the site that you're. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions?
You can go on top of the brachypodium. Yes. Are you still cutting that by hand?
So we mow bloody oaks twice a year at the moment. So we've been doing it in the autumn, well, late summer, early autumn, and then last year and I think the year before we did an early cut. I'd really like to graze it again at some point, but it's logistics more than anything that stops us from doing that. So the fencing all needs renewing and repairing, and then we need to work out a way of how to get a sheep trailer with sheep into the site safely, because that road is a nightmare. So yeah, it's thinking about how we do that in a safe way for the sheep and for us. No, maybe that's an early cut has helped with that.
Luckily, I've never come across Japanese knotweed, but can you tell me about the root system and what your hopes and fears are?
The root system's a nightmare. So it's rhizomal, so and the tiniest amount left in the ground, and it will carry on. So it does spread, and as I'm sure some of you have seen on construction programs and so on, it can make its way through brickwork and cause all sorts of problems on for buildings. So the general consensus is that it won't go away with one treatment. And so the funding that we've received, I actually spoke to the person about it today, is a minimum of 5 years treatment. I initially, when I was going to do it myself, was looking at stem injections with herbicide, where you chop them all down to so high, and then you literally inject every stem. And because it's only a small patch at Ketton, it's not actually, this hideous entire field, that would have been achievable with myself and my colleague. But I think the contractor that they are finding for us is going to spray it. But they'll do it with knowing that they're on a sensitive site. They're people who've worked on sensitive sites before, so they're getting all of the right licenses through the Environment Agency and DEFRA to make sure that they spray it in a controlled way to affect that particular patch of plants. But yeah, it's good question. So I haven't ever done knotweed eradication, and now that the contractor's taking it over, that's something they're going to tell me. I assume they'll remove it from site and burn it, but yeah, TBC.
Do you know the origin? Or does Jeremy the origin of?
Where it came from, I don't know. No. Someone's boot.
It's always been.
Right. Yeah. It is growing as a patch though, isn't it? I think its size is spreading, and it's one of the species that's very easy to recognise, and because Ketton is a very visited site, I get quite a lot of people who say, "Did you know you've got Japanese knotweed on your site?" Yes. Are you going to do anything about it? Yes. So I think from a a reputational point of view as a trust, it will be good to get it, you know, to start getting back on top of it and see if we can fully eradicate it. But it's very much with a pinch of salt because it's such an invasive and tenacious plant. You know, when I heard that you only need like an inch of the root and it will start growing again, you know, you kind of have to manage your expectations at how good we'll be at doing that, but we'll give it our best shot, or the contractors will.
Is there any risk that we can actually spread that when we visit the top?
And I don't think so, unless you go walking through the patch, which I wouldn't recommend.
I don't think it spreads easily by seed, does it?
No, it's rhizome,
Right,
yeah.
then.
Yeah.
But do you know John Bailey? Has he ever volunteered with your group?
No.
He used to come out, Jenny will know him, but he spent 30, 40 years at Leicester Uni researching.
Oh, really?
He's not with.
Okay. And he's local to the county?
Or somewhere.
Oh, right, okay.
And it's been to Ketton many times with the group in the past.
Get him down there with his knapsack on and see if he can
I haven't seen
help
him.
us.
That's why else
Yeah.
haven't seen him. Might be worth
Yeah,
speaking to him.
getting in touch. Any other questions?
That's brilliant, Sarah. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for having me.
No, thank you. That was excellent. It shows how good the grasslands are over here on this side. Certainly, yeah, like Sarah, I think Bloody Oaks is one of our favourites. It's quite nice and small, and you can get around it without getting lost.
You can, yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I would say the same for Coombs Meadow or Holwell. They're the two that
Yeah.
people tend to get lost in quite a bit.
And the trust anyway, during the summer, you just have to keep your eye on the on the newsletter, because some of these reserves we have guided walks. Bloody Oaks is one which seems to be fairly regularly occurring, but it's well worth, when you're this side, Bloody Oaks, Lookout and Holwell often has a guided walk.
Yeah.
That's another brilliant grassland reserve, amongst other things.
Yeah, we often do an early walk at Ketton for reptiles and butterflies
Yeah.
as well. We'll probably do one next year. And then a late summer for butterflies at Ketton too.
Great. Thank you very much indeed. And I'm glad the technology worked.
Yeah, we got there in the end.
We did. And thanks people at home for sticking with us. Thank you and good night.
Oh, yeah, they were listening, they could hear. Amazing. Thank you, Imogen.
Thank you. Yeah, several things now. Our next meeting, the